"We were absolutely thrilled when we located it," one team member recalled. "Our first instinct was to send the ROV down and recover one of those barrels, just to confirm this really was the heavy water destined for Germany." But the submarine wasn't only carrying heavy water for the Nazi atomic program. It was loaded with gold, hundreds of bars of it, treasure systematically looted from the central banks of every European nation Germany conquered, and from the personal possessions, and even the bodies, of millions of Holocaust victims, wedding rings torn from fingers, jewelry stripped from homes, gold dental fillings pried out of the mouths of murdered prisoners. All of it collected, melted down, and recast into unmarked bars now valued at an estimated $19 billion in today's money, just covering the entire floor, one researcher said. More than 8,000 gold bars had been stored in that vault alone, basically the entire gold reserves of the Reich at one point. This is staggering, and here's the part that still haunts historians. Roughly 30% of that looted gold was never recovered. It disappeared, funneled into Swiss bank vaults, sunk in alpine lakes, hidden in secret mountain caches, or loaded into the cargo holds of German U-boats that slipped away to Argentina in the final chaotic weeks of the war. But the gold wasn't even the most explosive cargo. Because alongside the bullion, the Third Reich was also smuggling something far more dangerous. Its most wanted war criminals, every name, date, and detail in this account is documented historical fact, the U-boat that refused to surrender. It's the winter of 1945 in Argentina, the war in Europe has ended. Hitler is dead. Admiral Karl Donitz, now head of state, has ordered every remaining German U-boat to surface immediately and surrender at the nearest Allied port. Two submarines ignore that order. The first is U-530, a Type IXE long-range boat commanded by 25-year-old Oberleutnant zur See Otto Wermuth. When Germany surrendered on May 8, 1945, U-530 was operating in the North Atlantic near Puerto Rico. Instead of heading to the nearest Allied base, Wermuth turned south, toward Argentina. The voyage should have taken 6 to 8 weeks. It took more than 2 months. Wermuth had taken command of U-530 just as the Reich was collapsing. He and his crew were now on one of the strangest journeys of the entire war. On the morning of July 10, 1945, U-530 emerged silently from the mist off Mar del Plata and blinked a surrender signal toward the Argentine Naval Control Tower. A sentry standing with his back to the sea didn't even notice the submarine arrive. When Argentine sailors finally boarded, they found something deeply suspicious. The entire ship's log had been destroyed. The deck gun, standard equipment on that class of U-boat, had been thrown overboard. All secret code books were missing. Not a single crew member carried identification papers. Here's the critical point. When Argentine and American intelligence officers interrogated Wermuth, he refused to explain what his submarine had been doing during those missing weeks, or why every piece of incriminating evidence had been deliberately destroyed before surrender. An Argentine army colonel named Romulo, stationed at Mar del Plata, later revealed something even more alarming. In the weeks leading up to U-530's arrival, he had discovered a hidden cave along the Argentine coastline stocked with German provisions, canned food, timber planks, spare parts, and other supplies. "I had no doubt this place was a support point," he said, "either to reprovision German submarines or to provide refreshment to clandestine passengers being disembarked." He photographed the site and sent a detailed report up the chain of command. None of it was ever made public. Then, on August 17, 1945, a second submarine appeared. U-977, commanded by Oberleutnant zur See Heinz Schaefer, surrendered at the same port after an astonishing 66 days spent mostly submerged, a record for a conventional submarine at the time, according to Schaefer. News of Germany's surrender convinced him and his crew to head for Argentina rather than become prisoners of war. In his 1952 memoir, Schaefer claimed the crew feared enslavement by the Allies, Nazi Propaganda had broadcast that German men would be sterilized and Germany turned into a goat pasture. Allied interrogators were unconvinced. Both crews were accused of transporting high-ranking Nazi officials, possibly even Hitler himself, along with gold to South America. Both denied everything. The submarines were eventually handed over to the United States Navy and sunk as target practice. Any evidence still aboard went to the bottom with them, and that's putting it lightly, because these weren't isolated incidents. They were symptoms of something far larger, an organized, state-level system, already in motion to funnel the Third Reich's stolen wealth and its most wanted war criminals to the other side of the world. The gold they stole, and where it came from. To understand the scale of what vanished, you have to understand what the Nazis stole. During the war, Germany systematically looted the gold reserves of every nation it conquered. Belgium lost $223 million in gold. The Netherlands lost $193 million. Austria, Czechoslovakia, Poland, all stripped clean. The total haul from central banks alone reached an estimated $600 million in 1945 values, roughly $19 billion today. But central bank gold was only part of the picture. The Nazis also stole from individuals. Nowhere was this theft more horrific than during the Holocaust. The SS, under Heinrich Himmler, systematically stripped Jewish families of everything they owned: wedding rings pulled from fingers, gold fillings extracted from the mouths of murdered victims, jewelry, watches, eyeglass frames, all collected, sorted, melted down, and recast into standard Reichsbank bars. These bars were deposited under the fictitious account name Max Heiliger. The SS code name for stolen Holocaust gold. It sat in the German central bank alongside legitimate national reserves, completely indistinguishable from any other bar. The regime had literally erased the identity of the victims from the very metal they stole from them. When American soldiers from General Patton's Third Army captured the mining town of Merkers, Germany, on April 4, 1945, they stumbled onto one of the most staggering discoveries of the entire war. Deep underground, 2,000 feet below the surface, behind a steel vault door that soldiers had to blast open, GIs found a room 75 feet wide and 150 feet deep. Inside, over 8,000 gold bars, 55 boxes of gold bullion, thousands of bags of gold coins, hundreds of bales of foreign currency, and suitcases filled with gold watches, jewelry, and bags of gold dental fillings wrenched from the jaws of concentration camp victims. When Generals Eisenhower, Patton, and Bradley rode the elevator 2,000 feet down to inspect the vault, Patton remarked that if the cables snapped, promotions in the U.S. Army would be considerably stimulated. Bradley looked at the rows of gold and told Patton, "If these were the old freebooting days when a soldier kept his loot, you'd be the richest man in the world." But nobody was laughing about what else they found in those bags: the gold torn from the bodies of the dead. The Merkers mine held roughly 250 tons of stolen wealth. When you have 1 or 2 gold crowns in your mouth and you take that out of the deceased whom you've murdered, one investigator later explained, there was a significant amount of gold, and we don't know the exact amount because it wasn't quantified. Historians now estimate that only about 70% of the total looted gold was ever recovered. Billions of dollars worth simply vanished, transferred to Swiss banks, hidden in alpine lakes, or loaded onto vessels headed for South America in the war's final weeks. And here's the key point: the gold that was recovered was moved out of the mine just in time, under Allied agreements. The Merkers region was set to fall under Soviet control. American troops raced to empty the vault and transfer everything to Frankfurt before the Soviets arrived. The Ratlins, how the guilty escaped while gold was being hidden. The men responsible for the worst crimes in human history were disappearing. The escape networks that funneled Nazis out of Europe became known as Ratlins, and they were shockingly well organized. Point 2 primary routes developed independently before eventually merging. Point 1 ran through Spain, where Franco's fascist government provided shelter and logistics. The other, the most notorious, ran through Rome and, disturbingly, the Vatican itself. the key figure was an Austrian bishop named Alois Hudel, rector of the Pontifical Teutonic College in Rome and a self-described bridge builder between Catholicism and National Socialism. In 1937, Hudel had published a book titled The Basic Foundations of National Socialism, arguing that compromise was possible between Nazi ideology and Catholic teachings. After the war, he used his position within the Vatican's Refugee Commission to provide fleeing Nazis with forged identity documents, money, shelter, and connections to the International Red Cross, which issued travel papers that served as de facto passports in South America. Between the war's end and 1951, the Red Cross issued roughly 120,000 such documents, often with no background checks whatsoever. A 1947 U.S. Embassy report in Rome noted bluntly, "The Vatican is the largest single organization involved in the illegal movement of immigrants." When Franz Stangl, commandant of Treblinka extermination camp, a man responsible for the deaths of approximately 900,000 people, arrived in Rome looking for help, Hudel greeted him personally. "You must be Franz Stangl," the bishop said, holding out both hands. "I was expecting you." Hudel arranged quarters in Rome, secured a Red Cross passport, obtained a Syrian visa, and even bought Stangl a ship ticket. Stangl made it first to Syria, then eventually to Brazil, where he lived openly under his own name and worked at a Volkswagen factory until his arrest in 1967. But Stangl was just one of thousands. Adolf Eichmann, the architect of the Holocaust who designed the railway networks feeding the death camps, received forged papers identifying him as Ricardo Clement, traveled through the Vatican network, and reached Buenos Aires in 1950. Joseph Mengele, the Angel of Death, who conducted horrific experiments on twins and children at Auschwitz, fled through Italy with church assistance and a fake Italian passport under the name Helmut Greger, reaching Buenos Aires in 1949. Klaus Barbie, the Butcher of Lyon, was helped not by the Vatican but by American intelligence. The U.S. Counterintelligence Corps actively used Barbie as an anti-communist asset before helping him escape to Bolivia through the same Croatian Ratlin network run by Father Krunoslav Draganovic out of the San Girolamo Seminary in Rome. And here's the deeper truth: American involvement went even further. Under Operation Paperclip, the United States actively recruited over 1,600 German scientists, engineers, and technicians, some with direct ties to Nazi weapons programs and concentration camp labor, offering them immunity and new identities in exchange for their expertise. The Cold War had already begun, and former enemies became assets overnight. As one British intelligence official put it, "The Americans and British were violently anti-communist and used the escape routes to Argentina as a recruitment tool." Argentina's role was equally deliberate. President Juan Perón, who had served as a military attaché in fascist Italy during the 1930s, publicly called the Nuremberg trials a disgrace and an insult to military honor. His government set up its own Ratlins through Scandinavia and Switzerland, and Argentine officials were paid by Nazi agents as early as 1943 to shield incoming fugitives. A 1997 investigation by Argentina's DAIA organization uncovered 22,000 documents proving an organized network managed by Rodolfo Freude, a presidential advisor with an office inside the Casa Rosada, the Argentine presidential residence. Freude was close to Eva Perón's brother Juan Duarte, connecting the Ratlins directly to the country's inner circle of power. Up to 5,000 Nazis are estimated to have settled in Argentina alone, thousands more scattered across Brazil, Paraguay, Chile, and Bolivia, building new lives with stolen wealth while their victims' families had nothing. Some were eventually caught. Most were not. The most dramatic capture came on May 11, 1960, when a Mossad team ambushed Adolf Eichmann on a street in the San Fernando district of Buenos Aires. As he walked home from a bus stop, they wrestled him into a car.at safe house. They asked his name. He replied, "Ricardo Clement." An agent asked again, in German. Finally he answered, "Adolf Eichmann." He had been living under a false name in Argentina for nearly a decade, working at a Mercedes-Benz factory, raising a family, living an ordinary suburban life while the families of his 6 million victims grieved. Eichmann was smuggled out of Argentina on an LL flight disguised as a sedated crew member, tried in Jerusalem in a globally televised proceeding, and executed on June 1, 1962. The only person ever executed under Israeli law, but Eichmann's capture was the exception, not the rule. Joseph Mengele, despite being one of the most hunted men on earth, lived freely in Argentina throughout the 1950s. After Eichmann's kidnapping, Zvi Aharoni interrogated him and asked, "Where's Mengele? Where's Mengele?" Eichmann refused to answer any question about him. Mengele felt so safe that by 1956 he was using his real name and had obtained Argentine citizenship as José Mengele. Argentine intelligence maintained a detailed dossier on him. They knew exactly where he lived, what businesses he owned, and who his associates were. They did nothing. When West Germany finally requested extradition in 1959, an Argentine judge rejected the request, calling it political persecution. Mengele fled to Paraguay, then Brazil, where he was sheltered by sympathizers on rural farms for nearly 2 decades. He drowned after a stroke while swimming off the coast of Bertioga, Brazil, on February 7, 1979, at age 67. He was buried under the false name Wolfgang Gerhard. His identity wasn't confirmed until 1985, when German police raided his family home in Bavaria and found letters revealing his location. He never spent a single day in a courtroom for his crimes. Meanwhile, the gold trail led investigators to some uncomfortable places in the Austrian Alps. Lake Toplitz, a deep, oxygen-depleted lake surrounded by sheer cliffs and accessible only by a narrow forest path, had been used as a Nazi naval testing site during the war. Local farmers witnessed SS officers dumping heavy wooden crates into its dark waters in the war's final days. In 1959, divers funded by the German magazine Stern recovered 15 crates from the lake floor containing millions in counterfeit British pounds, part of Operation Bernhard, a Nazi scheme to destabilize Britain's economy by flooding markets with fake currency. They also recovered documents from the Reich Main Security Office. But the legendary gold, rumored to be worth billions, was never found. Over the years, at least 5 people died searching Lake Toplitz for it, drowning in the oxygen-deprived water or becoming entangled in the layers of sunken logs that choke the lake floor. Then in the 1990s, the financial trail exploded into public view. Swiss banks, long suspected of laundering Nazi assets, were finally forced to confront their history. A Swiss commission headed by historian Jean-François Bergier estimated that the Swiss National Bank had received $440 million in gold from Nazi sources during the war, equivalent to roughly $8.5 billion today. Over half of that gold was believed to have been looted from conquered nations. The commission also found that the bank's governing board knew at an early point that the gold was stolen, and accepted it anyway. Under intense international pressure, Switzerland's 3 largest banks, UBS, Credit Suisse, and Swiss Bank Corporation, agreed to a landmark $1.25 billion settlement to compensate Holocaust survivors and their heirs. The Volcker Commission, which audited dormant accounts, identified over 53,000 Swiss bank accounts with probable connections to Holocaust victims, accounts the banks had denied existed for half a century, and as recently as 2025, U.S. Senate investigators uncovered evidence that Credit Suisse had failed to disclose hundreds of additional Nazi-linked accounts during the original investigations, suggesting the full scope of complicity was even deeper than anyone realized. The ghosts that won't rest. Here's the hard truth: despite everything we've uncovered, the gold at Merkers, the Ratlins through Rome, the Swiss bank settlements, the handful of prosecutions, the vast majority of Nazi war criminals who escaped were never caught, and the vast majority of the stolen wealth was never returned. Historians estimate that around $37 billion worth of Nazi-looted treasure remains unaccounted for, scattered in lake beds, mine shafts, bank vaults, and the foundations of businesses built with blood money across South America. Some of those businesses grew into major enterprises. Some of those families became prominent and powerful. In 1984, a list of 12,000 Argentine Nazis was discovered. When it was finally shared with the Simon Wiesenthal Center in 2020, investigators found names they already knew had traveled to Argentina. Some theorized that funds derived from Nazi plunder had been deposited into the Central Bank of Argentina itself, then withdrawn as exchangeable currency through Swiss accounts, and the U-boats that surrendered at Mar del Plata. To this day, no one can fully account for what they carried, or where they stopped. U-530's missing weeks remain unexplained. The destroyed logs, the jettisoned weapons, the crew with no identification, none of it has ever been adequately explained. Both submarines were eventually sunk as torpedo targets by the U.S. Navy. Whatever evidence remained aboard was obliterated, but Colonel Romulo's discovery of that supply cave on the Argentine coast, combined with everything we now know about the organized escape networks, suggests that what was officially declared is far from the full story. The case of Joseph Mengele crystallizes the injustice more than any other. A man who selected who lived and who died at Auschwitz with a wave of his white-gloved hand, pointing right for slave labor, left for the gas chamber. Who injected dye into children's eyes to see if he could change their color. Who sewed twins together to create artificial conjoined siblings. He lived for 34 years after the war, in Argentina, Paraguay, and Brazil, supported by family money. Protected by sympathizers. Ignored by governments that had the intelligence to find him but lacked the political will to act. He died swimming in the ocean, comfortable, free, never tried. His bones are now used for forensic medicine training at the University of Sao Paulo. Meanwhile, the families of his victims, those who survived, spent decades fighting Swiss banks for access to their own relatives' stolen savings. Many received nothing. That is the real story of Nazi gold and the submarines that carried it toward Argentina. Not a mystery yet to be solved, but a crime whose consequences are still unfolding. The Merkers mine showed us what the Nazis stole. The Ratlins showed us who helped them escape. The Swiss settlements showed us who profited, and the submarines that appeared off Mar del Plata, with their missing logs and destroyed evidence, remind us that for every secret we've uncovered, there are others that sank beneath the waves and may never surface. But here's the catch: every few years, another dormant account is found. Another archive is declassified. Another name is matched to a face. History isn't finished with this story, and neither are the people still waiting for justice. If this story gripped you, subscribe and turn on notifications, because we're diving deeper into the lost treasures and war crimes the world tried to forget. Drop a comment below and tell me, should the remaining gold be recovered and returned to the victims' heirs? And check out our video on the most wanted Nazi fugitives who were never caught. The link is right here on screen. Music fades.